David Drayton was working on the final brushstrokes of a movie poster when the lights in his house flickered, then shut off completely. A storm had been gathering for hours, and now it seemed to have claimed the power. And they decided to sleep in the basement for safety. In the middle of the night, a deafening crash shook the house. The storm had hurled a tree branch through David's window, destroying his carefully crafted movie poster. The next morning, he surveyed the aftermath. Shattered glass, fallen branches, and the roof of his boathouse crushed by a toppled tree from his neighbor Norton's yard. David cursed under his breath. He had clashed with Norton over property lines before, and this was the last thing he needed. He stomped across the yard to confront Norton. "Your tree wrecked my boathouse," David said bluntly. Norton looked just as miserable. "My car's totaled too. Can we call it even?" David shook his head. Since Norton's car was crushed, he asked for a ride to the market, and David reluctantly agreed. David, Billy, and Norton drove toward the market, passing military trucks heading in the opposite direction toward the mountains. "What do you think is going on up there?" Norton asked. David shrugged. "There's that base. Who knows what they're working on? Chemical research, alien tech, or something worse." When they reached the market, it was in chaos. The storm had knocked out the power and the phones, leaving the townspeople anxious and desperate to stock up on supplies. As they waited in line, 3 soldiers arrived, intending to board a bus for leave, only to be stopped by a commanding officer. Their leave had been canceled. The soldiers looked uneasy, adding to the growing tension in the store. Just then, Dan Miller, a local, burst through the entrance, clutching his nose, which bled profusely. "Something killed my friend in the mist!" he screamed. Panic swept through the store as people noticed a strange, dense fog creeping in from the mountains. One man tried to make a dash for his car, but was swallowed by the mist before he could open the door. His screams echoed from within, only to be cut off abruptly. Then a thunderous thud shook the ground, rattling the store's windows. "Earthquake?" someone whispered, but it felt like the impact of something massive. While most of the townspeople huddled in fear, a woman named Mrs. Carmody began preaching. "This is the wrath of God," she cried. "Judgment is upon us." Many rolled their eyes, dismissing her apocalyptic warnings as hysteria. When a woman asked if someone could escort her home to her children, no one volunteered, and she stepped into the mist alone. David tried to comfort Billy, aided by kind locals like Amanda and Ollie, the store manager. But tension continued to rise as the mist pressed closer. David and Ollie went to the back room to investigate strange noises when something slammed against the delivery door. "Something's out there," David whispered. A young clerk named Norm insisted on fixing the generator outside, despite David's protests. As soon as they cracked the door, massive tentacles snaked from the mist, seizing Norm. The workers, paralyzed with shock, watched helplessly as the tentacles dragged Norm into the fog. David hacked off a piece of the creature with an axe before slamming the door shut. Back inside, David showed the others the tentacle piece. Though many were skeptical at first, the undeniable evidence silenced them. They hurried to barricade the windows with sacks of dog food and charcoal, hoping to keep whatever was in the mist at bay. Carmody's sermons grew louder. "The boy was our first offering. More sacrifices will be demanded," she declared. When Amanda slapped her, Carmody only smiled and predicted another death before nightfall. Night brought new horrors. Giant insects, unlike anything anyone had ever seen, swarmed the windows, followed by monstrous bird-like creatures. Drawn to the flashlights inside, the creatures shattered the glass and invaded the store. In the ensuing chaos, Sally, one of the clerks, was stung and died within minutes. David and Ollie managed to drive the creatures back, but the ordeal left everyone shaken. To their horror, Carmody gained followers, some believing her claims that only blood sacrifices could appease God's wrath. David confided in Amanda, Ollie, and Dan. "If we stay here, she'll turn the others against us. We need to get out before it's too late." They decided to venture to the pharmacy next door for medical supplies. As they entered the building, they found it shrouded in thick webs. The bodies of townspeople and soldiers were cocooned in silk, some still twitching with life. Suddenly, spider-like creatures emerged, shooting acidic webs that burned through flesh. The group fought their way out, but not without losses. Jim was killed, and another member was cut down by the deadly webs. Back in the store, David's fears were confirmed. Nearly everyone had fallen under Carmody's sway. Desperate, David confronted Jessup, the remaining soldier. Under pressure, Jessup admitted that the military base had been conducting experiments to open a portal to another dimension, and they had accidentally unleashed the mist and its horrors. When Carmody learned of this, she riled the crowd into a frenzy. "This man has brought ruin upon us," she shrieked. The mob stabbed Jessup and tossed him into the mist, where a massive creature snatched him up. That night, David and his group made their move to escape, but Carmody blocked their path, demanding Billy and Amanda as sacrifices. "Their blood will save us," she cried. In the ensuing chaos, Ollie pulled out Amanda's gun and shot Carmody twice, once in the chest and once in the head. The mob, now leaderless, scattered in fear. David, Billy, Amanda, Irene, and Dan fled into the mist. They fought their way through spider creatures and reached David's truck. But as they drove to his house, David was met with the sight of his wife's body, cocooned in webbing, just like the soldiers at the pharmacy. With heavy hearts, they drove on, hoping to find an end to the mist. But the mist stretched endlessly, and when their truck finally ran out of gas, despair settled over them. Inside the vehicle, David looked at the gun they had taken from Ollie. 4 bullets. 5 people. The others silently nodded, understanding what needed to be done. One by one, David fired the gun. The shots echoed through the mist until only David remained, the empty gun trembling in his hand. Sobbing uncontrollably, David stepped out of the truck, screaming for the creatures to take him. But instead, he saw military convoys emerge from the mist, burning the webs and creatures, restoring order. Among the rescued survivors was the woman who had left the store earlier. The mist began to recede, revealing that salvation had been just moments away. David fell to his knees, realizing in anguish that he had killed those he loved for nothing. His screams echoed into the clear air, a haunting reminder of what fear and hopelessness had driven him to do.